Due to technology difficulties, our meeting did not begin until approximately 15 minutes after the meeting started. We are sorry for any inconvenience. Debido a las dificultades tecnológicas, la grabación de nuestra reunión no comenzó hasta aproximadamente 15 minutos después del inicio de la misma. Lamentamos cualquier inconveniente.
Health Council's initiative, and it's really meant to, support industries that are most highly impacted by COVID. The initiatives ensure that employees in hard-hit industries are protected by the LA County Health Officer orders. These councils are comprised of workers that conduct peer-to-peer education to their coworkers regarding required safety measures and compliance. The initiative also includes educational outreach to employers regarding infection control measures, and really just provides support to workers in large, manufacturing type industries. So like I said, we've put a lot of value into our outreach. So we continue. There's so many different initiatives that we have. Another initiative that we have is our Community Equity Fund. And again, this is really to, address kind of those communities disproportionately impacted by the virus, and really serve those kind of niche communities, those maybe smaller communities that feel, unseen, right, through this pandemic. So within the Community Equity Fund, which is also, it's a collaboration with DPH and DHS, CBOs have received funding to provide a range of services. So yes, they'll be providing outreach. A small portion of will be providing outreach, but they're also going to hone in and more on systems navigation and giving people referrals. And then also we have a small team that is going to be doing in the field case investigation and contact tracing, is really kind of connecting with those individuals that, for whatever reason have not been able to be connected by contact tracers. And then finally, like I said, we just have so many initiatives going on. So finally, we're really excited to announce that we are also providing in-home vaccination for homebound individuals who, are unable to access our existing community vaccination sites. Again, this is a silent population that feels that they weren't seeing kind of during the pandemic, because we really needed to get people, we really made this push to get people to our sites, but this was a very vulnerable population that needs to get vaccinated. So now we've actually created this process where community-based organizations or other agencies can make referrals for clients. Or now we've actually launched, a public referral form so that individuals themselves or their loved ones can make referrals for them. And then, they could get this process, and depending on the criteria, someone will call them, and, based on certain criteria, we'll actually send somebody to their home to get them vaccinated. So as you can see, we have a real comprehensive kind of strategies kind of to ensure, one, there's lots of sites and lots of places that people could get vaccinated, and that we're trying to meet people where they are, using and leveraging our partnerships with our community-based organizations that have served a huge important role in this work. And, it's ongoing. So we are continuing to check in, figuring out what the gaps are, and seeing how we could, assess it and kind of come up with new ways to meet those needs. So this is just, again, stay informed. Things are constantly changing. Hopefully the changes are going to slow down now. We're kind of going to this place where it's like, maybe it's just going to be status quo, and we're not going to have these huge changes every week. But this is where you could get more information. And then just my last slide, because I think they're going to share the PowerPoint, is just where you could get more information on all the kind of initiatives and things that I've talked about.
Excuse me, Tiffany, there are two unanswered questions in the chat from Lourdes and another from Yolanda.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Tiffany. So Lourdes was asking if we could use the phone number that you shared in their outreach educational materials to help connect people to vaccines.
Absolutely. Please do share widely as much. Please.
I was going to say, I think I can almost speak on your behalf.
Yes.
Please push the information
Yes.
out there. We do have, I think, not just countywide, but countrywide, a really big degree of vaccine hesitancy. So anytime that one of you as the trusted partners at the HICP table can build relationship and reassure people about the power or the importance of getting vaccinated, please do help get those individuals connected to vaccines. There's a lot of vaccine availability across the county. We also have a question here from Yolanda asking, California stats has the state at near herd immunity. Will immunizing youth and school districts adopting regs to required immunization take us to herd immunity statewide? What is the conversation about herd immunity and our path there across?
Yes, that's a great question. The thought is that, probably about a month ago, if we had continued in the pace that we were getting people vaccinated, that we probably within at least LA County would have reached kind of herd or quote unquote herd immunity probably by August. But as I mentioned before in the beginning of this presentation, we've seen a decline. So there's still, this hope that we'll eventually get there. But I think it's just this thought that, we just need to get people vaccinated. We don't want people just to rely on the thought of herd immunity, right? We still need to kind of take protection and take precautions, but it's going to probably take a little bit longer. I mean, we're hopeful because now we're hearing that, the FDA is going to, allow vaccinations for 12 to 15-year-olds, maybe sometime next week. And then for our lower, our younger kids, potentially that will come sometimes early in the fall. So as we get more people, as we get to children it's really going to be important to get children vaccinated. It'll help us kind of get to that level quicker. And as far as just like schools adopting kind of, required immunization, just as a reminder that certain schools can do that, like, especially private institutions. But as far as, our kind of elementary schools, high schools, districts, and things like that, it is still, this vaccine is still on emergency use. And so really we can't mandate it while it's on emergency use. And it usually takes about a year, or two before they remove it from emergency use. So just FYI about that.
And Roberto, would you like to ask a question of Tiffany?
Hi, Tiffany, good morning. Thanks
Good
for
morning.
the great information. Based on the graph, we know that the rates of vaccination among young Black and Latino men is lower than other groups. I'm just curious about if the county is thinking of setting clinics in state or city parks that has a lot of sports facilities. My son plays soccer. Every time I go to state park, those parks are full of young men.
Mm-hmm.
And they're usually in the early evenings when they come out and they just, full of capacity. So I'm just curious if the county is thinking of perhaps setting clinics in early evenings at state parks where young men, where there's soccer facilities or basketball facilities, they're there. So it will be something to consider.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that suggestion. The thought is especially with our mobile vaccination clinics, we're going everywhere, anywhere and everywhere. You want us to go, to, the Home Depot, you want us to go to the park. We just want to go where people are. So I, highly suggest if you have any recommendations, especially any specific sites that you think would be great, please email, and I'll put my email in the chat. Please send me an email. We're always looking for that feedback.
Yeah, the state park on San Fernando Road, literally every evening, there's literally hundreds of young men. So that would be I think a good facilities, but I can email you the site.
Yeah, definitely. I'll put my email in the chat. And again, if anyone has any recommendations, we're always looking for it. And as you can see, we've expanded our team. So we're a mobile team. So we're happy to go out.
Thank you.
Tiffany, we have a suggestion from Ari about mobile units at Home Depot.
Yeah, no. I love that you, I mentioned that. So yeah, we're looking at like Home Depot. We're even looking at like, hot, little like taco shop kind of areas, just anywhere where people are. But yes, we definitely want to get to those workers that, that are there and anywhere that people congregate. So I love that suggestion. Thank you, Ari.
And then we have two comments from Juana. I'm afraid my simultaneous translation isn't on, but I was wondering if someone Spanish speaking could read the questions from, or the comments from Juana.
I can go ahead and do that, Heather. This is Julia. Okay, good morning, everyone. So yes, Ms. Mena is asking of the importance to reach out to the community and speak to them, because there's people that to make them aware of the real facts, the truth about the vaccine, because many people still don't accept it or don't really know the reality, right, about the vaccine. So they think that there's a lot of myths and those types of situations that people believe or what they hear on TV. So definitely this will be a good idea to keep them informed. Thank you. And good
So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Julia, and thank you, Juana, for that comment. Absolutely, we see that echoed around the community and in the need to continue to push for more vaccinations. That herd immunity doesn't happen by itself. It happens because there's a large number of people vaccinated and who have immunity to COVID. So it's really, really important that we continue forward with those efforts. Do we have any additional and final questions for Tiffany? Well, if not, thank you, Tiffany, for a fantastic presentation and really helping us understand how much DPH is taking this so incredibly seriously and really working to ensure that the most vulnerable among us and the communities hardest hit are prioritized in the outreach efforts. So thank you so much, and all of your colleagues.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right, thanks. So with this, we are excited to move on in our presentation. We have next up Jose Gardia from the Office of Supervisor Hilda Solis, who's going to share with us a quick update on the SCAG award that has been awarded to the first district. So Jose, welcome.
Thank you, Heather. Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay?
You sound great.
Excellent, excellent. And thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words on this important award. We had previously announced that the Office of Supervisor Hilda Solis had been awarded a SCAG grant to study the feasibility of developing an enhanced infrastructure financing district in and around the LAC USC campus. Very briefly, as a background, what these financing districts do is they allow local jurisdictions to capture the increase in property tax over a series of years in order to reinvest into the community. In this particular case, we're talking about reinvesting it back into developing affordable housing and green space development, as well as other infrastructure opportunities. So we were given the announcement earlier this month or last month, and we've had a series of follow-up calls with SCAG. Wanted to share with everyone a little bit of the time frame as we move forward, and more importantly, the role of community engagement in this process, because as you all know, we sought your support and we received it, and we appreciate it. And I think that was a major piece in our application, the key element of community engagement. So we are on a relatively short time frame. Next 30 days, we will be doing some administrative work to get the county to formally approve and support the grant itself. We will continue to work with SCAG to fine tune the scope of work of the grant. At which point, once the scope of work is approved, they will then solicit bids from consultants that will then be the manager of the process. Now, one of the things I like for us to be thinking about on the community side is be very particular about the role that we want to play on the community side. Heather, one of the things we talked about earlier was, do we want to create a subcommittee of the HICP that would formally engage the consultant? And in addition to that, do we want to think about the number of community meetings that we would want to have? I'd like to have those pieces of information relatively soon so we can incorporate that into the work program, into the scope of work, so that there is no surprise on the side of the consultant. So that's something we can continue discussing, Heather, but I'd like for us to be thinking about that now. Once we have a consultant in place, and we anticipate we'll probably have a team in place possibly as early as late August, but more likely September of this year. And then at that point, we'll know exactly what the time frame will be to develop the feasibility report. The good news is that we do have until 2023 to expend the dollars. We don't expect to work till 2023. We'd like to do this within the year. But again, that's a discussion we can have with community and whatever subcommittee we put together. So that's the update. We're excited. I think this adds to a lot of the other work that our office is doing in relation to funding for projects in and around the campus. So this, I think, is a tremendous opportunity for us to capture the value of all this investment in the local community. So we're excited and happy to take some questions if there are any. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you so much, Jose. It's nice to hear that timeline and that framing of the opportunity. And I know that the HICP membership is very excited to participate in the community engagement efforts. Do we have any questions for Jose? Well, we look forward to hearing more, because obviously this is just the start of a much longer term conversation as we unveil and roll out the SCAG award process.
Absolutely. Thank you, Heather. Thank you all.
Thank you. All right. Well, very exciting. Next up, I'm delighted to introduce Esther Lim from the Office of Supervisor Solis. She'll be sharing with us some highlights of the Measure J initiative. Esther, welcome.
Thank you so much, Heather, and thank you folks for inviting me. I'm Esther. I'm Supervisor's Justice Deputy, and so I think I had shared some slides with you, Heather, and this is just to provide some overview. Let's see, I think there was one right before that, Heather, that kind of gave the Measure J overview. No, if you want to go back.
I'm so sorry. I think I only got the 3 slides. My apologies.
Oh, really? Okay. Oh,
No.
that's interesting.
Okay.
Okay. So let me just, I guess I'll just kind of share. So there's oh, okay.
I'm so
So
sorry.
there are, no worries. So basically Measure J, let me just kind of give a brief overview. This was a voter, a ballot that the voters approved in November of 2020. And this received over 60% of support from LA voters. And so basically Measure J, it would mandate that at least 10%, so it's a minimum 10%, so it's the floor, not the ceiling, that the county's locally generated unrestricted funding would go towards 2 categories: direct community investment and alternatives to incarceration. And in the Measure J language, it allows the county to build up to that minimum 10%. And partly it's because Measure J came into effect during the pandemic that we're still in, and obviously the fiscal crisis that that the entire world is going through. So the CEO came out last month saying that for year 1 there's about $100 million allotment. And so the way that they came up with this amount is that we have our net county costs, so locally generated funds, and then minus the restricted funds, which is for salary, for employee benefit, for legal settlements, debt service payments, public assistance. So there's several kind of restricted funding, and when you take the net county costs minus the restricted funds, you have the amount and then 10% of that. So the 100 million is actually not the full 10%, because as I shared, there is that three-year ramp up. So with the 2 kind of categories, the direct community investment and the alternatives to incarceration, there's about about kind of 9 different different funding areas. And so this slide that you see in front of you, under where it says November 2020, are kind of the 9 different funding areas. So as you see, there's youth development, workforce development, small business development, rental assistance, capital funding, pretrial non-custody, community-based health services, non-custodial diversion, community-based restorative justice programs. So mind you, Measure J funding, the specific language in there says that none of these funds can go towards carceral agencies. So the Sheriff's Department, probation, the DA, those are not included. And the intent behind Measure J is that the allotment goes directly into the community. So in February, from February to March of this year, of the 9 funding areas, the Measure J advisory committee or advisory board, and then we'll go to the next slide later, but you'll kind of see that breakdown. They decided out of the 9 funding areas that they're going to create 5 subcommittees, and those 5 subcommittees are education access and youth development, economic opportunity and sustainability, housing, diversion, behavioral health and health, and reentry. So from March to about this month, they are going to be concluding, I believe, in the next couple of weeks. They have received kind of county and community proposals for each of these subcommittee kind of areas. And so right now, what the Measure J kind of advisory committee is doing is they're going through literally hundreds of proposals to kind of prioritize which are the areas that they're going to put before the CEO that will eventually put it before the board as this is the Measure J, committee and communities want for how they want the Measure J funding to be spent. So as you can see, that's where we're at right now. So it's really March from April. They're going through the proposals, and in June, the Measure J advisory, if all goes well, should have a proposal in front of the CEO, and eventually it come to the board, and the board has ultimate kind of approval on what items are going to be funded or not through Measure J. Heather, if you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is completely community led in that we have a 17 advisory committee. It's very, very large, but you'll see that there are 5 board appointees, and then there are county department leads. So we have DMH, we have ODR, we have DPH, we have DHS, and we also have the Substance Abuse Prevention and Control. We also have 5 people with lived experience who also make up this committee. And we also have labor representatives from Carpenters and SEIU. So these are the appointees that are listening to the proposals, have also kind of led and co-led some of the 5 kind of subcommittees on Measure J funds use. And they're the ones who are going to be kind of debating and discussing what those priorities are going to be out of the hundreds that they receive from both county and community. Heather, if you could go to the next slide, please. So as you see on the left of the screen, those are the 5 subcommittees, right? Economic opportunity, diversion, education, housing, and reentry. And there are 2 co-chairs. So one of the co-chairs is someone from the advisory committee, in the column that you see in the middle. And then on the right are people who the community voted to also co-chair these committees. And so this is a real collaboration between kind of community and county. However, I will share kind of in the discussions, there is a really strong call from the community saying that the money, the Measure J allotment should really go towards the community proposals, the proposals that the community wants in their respective areas versus what the county is proposing, because they go back to the intention of Measure J is so that the funding is going to the community so that they can address issues around mass incarceration, public safety, housing security, food insecurity, and obviously youth development. And also just share, as I said, there was hundreds of proposals from both county and community, and these proposals amounted to almost $1 billion. And so the Measure J committee has a huge huge undertaking in that they have to take all those proposals and kind of select and prioritize, what is actually going to be funded. And given that the CEO came out with 100 million, the committee is going to have to really weed through a lot of these proposals. But this is the first time the county is doing something like this in this magnitude. And the way that we're kind of seeing this process is that this is year one, right? We still have year 2, year 3, and honestly, just forever, as long as we have Measure J. So I know we'll fine tune this process, and I think this is just I think for some folks it's been a little bit uncomfortable, but the intent of Measure J is for our communities to get the funding. And and from Supervisor Solis, this is something that she is extremely supportive of. And also in the Measure J language, there is information, or there is a push for the funding to go towards programs like the or construction like the restorative care village. So I just want to conclude there. I know it's a lot of information, but I'm sure you all have all the slides. And if you have not participated in a Measure J a meeting, I would highly encourage you to participate. There's lots of time for public comment, and just to kind of hear what the community is really asking for. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you so much, Esther. I have a question in the chat from Priscilla asking, is the funding for 1 year or for the following years?
So this is, so once it's approved by the board, it would be for this year. And then the process would start all over again, right? So the committee would meet again, listen to, additional proposals. And then, for the next fiscal year, it would go through the same process, right? It would be approved by the CEO, sent over to the board then approves for the second year funding. So that's basically the process. And given that this first year, there was almost $1 billion worth of proposals, I think there's, honestly, I think the committee is going to have their hands full in types of, obviously, the great need we see in the community.
Absolutely. Do we have additional questions for Esther about the Measure J initiative? Well, thank you so much, Esther. Obviously, as we know, we're just at the start of this. We're in the infancy of the Measure J initiative. It's so exciting. It's so wonderful to see such structure coming together and such broad-based community representation. I know after the committees weed through those $1 billion worth of proposals and select and propose back to the board, we'd love to invite you back to share with us what are those next steps and what proposals will be implemented, as well as like a roadmap for the future. It depends, because I imagine not everything will be funded in this year, so there might be this kind of plan for progressively funding projects over time. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you again, Heather, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, no, it's so delighted. I was so delighted to have you come because we saw some of those proposals being prepared from DHS, and it was just exciting to see so many creative ideas about redirecting funding into prevention, into helping keep people away from incarceration and away from the criminal justice system by early intervention. So thank you again for this great presentation. And to respond to you, Yolanda, yes, the slides have been sent around to our HICP partnership at about 8:30, 8:40 this morning. So check your inbox. But if you don't have them, please reach out and we'll happily send them to you.
And also, Heather, I know that a slide was missing, so I'll resend it to you so that the membership has the entire slide deck.
Perfect. Thank you, Esther. And just so everyone knows, we do always upload a copy of the recording of this meeting, as well as a copy of the slides to our HICP website. So you're always welcome to visit that website for past materials. Thanks, Esther. Appreciate it. Okay. Well, with that, we're very excited to move on in our agenda to next steps. We have, as you may remember, we had a presentation on the LA County housing element at last meeting. And this meeting, we're delighted to welcome Matt from LA City Planning to share with us the LA City Planning element, housing element plan. Thanks, Matt.
That's right.
Welcome
Yes.
to HICP.
Thank you so much, Heather. Good morning, everyone. So nice to be with you this morning. My name is Matt Gillespie. I'm with the Los Angeles City Planning Department, and we'll be talking about this housing element update, which is this 8-year plan. I understand you guys know a little bit about it, so I'll try to run through some of the background you may already be familiar with from having gotten the county's presentation last month, and I'm afraid you're going to be comparing us and contrasting us. But really seems like a wonderful group here. So happy to be here. But just a bit about the housing element. Obviously, it's not just the planning department that's involved in housing in Los Angeles. It is part of our general plan, so we generally take the lead. But this is a cross-city effort of all agencies that touch housing, from the Housing Community Investment Department to LAHSA, HACLA, the Housing Agency, et cetera. So just want to acknowledge our partner agencies. Next slide, please. So yeah, we'll be going through a bit of background, hopefully at a higher level, getting into a bit of our housing needs here in Los Angeles City that we're identifying, and then really get to this RHNA. I imagine you may have heard this acronym, Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and the implications of that number and that target on the city, and then get into some of our vision and draft concepts, and then sort of the next steps, and have a Q&A after that. So just a bit of background. Next, please. Yeah, so as I mentioned, this is part of our general plan, which is really this, sort of constitution for the city, we call it. It's really the guiding document, the vision for the city's growth and development. And we're actually updating not just the housing element. I particularly wanted to mention this other more minor but significant impact update to the safety element. Given the health focus of this committee, we are actually required through some state legislation to look at some elements of our safety element as well. And so wanted to talk about that on the next slide, please. Yeah, so along with the housing element, there's also the safety element. It's triggered essentially when we update the housing element now. And it's asking us to look at things like fire. Wildfires, obviously hugely important, risks of flooding, and climate change and resilience, kind of in the context of while you're thinking about planning for a lot of new housing, you need to be thinking about these hazard areas and how we're mitigating potential impacts on the environment. So we're going to be sort of doing a comprehensive update of that document. It's a little old, and making sure that all the sort of best practices around hazard mitigation and floodplain management is incorporated. We've got this great sustainability plan from the mayor's office. We're calling it our Green New Deal. LA City version of it. If you haven't checked that document out, it's wonderful. And as well as this Resilient Los Angeles document. These are some plans that have been done just recently, and we want to make sure those are incorporated into our general plan. So we'll be doing that. Next slide. So just, I think a little bit about the housing element law, but really it's this, comes out of the late 60s, this fair housing movement across the country, really, right? With the passage of the Fair Housing Act, and thinking about in California going a little further than that, and thinking about how do we make sure cities really do their fair share around housing, that communities are not really allowed to just say we're not interested in planning for more housing for the population growth, particularly affordable housing needs. So making sure every city has land available for affordable housing is really the core centerpiece of this law. And of course, it's been expanded. It's 8 years, it's mandatory, it is approved by the state, it must be certified, or there are actually some fairly serious consequences if you are not certified. So we're on a pretty strict timeline and have some, some check boxes to check with the state, but we really see this as the city's housing plan for the next 8 years. And so this is really important, and we really want to make sure this document reflects this moment we're in here, and really advances so many of the important causes around housing. Obviously, we have huge housing issues here in Los Angeles, and we're really looking at this as an opportunity to advance progressive policy. Part of that is this new term called AFFH, or Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. You may have heard about this with Trump. This is sort of what Trump was talking about with the suburbs for a while. It was a federal rule that they rescinded, and now it's back. But we have this in effect at the state level through some legislation last year. And really, this is a concept that says when you plan for housing or do community development work, you need to go further beyond just preventing discrimination. We need to affirmatively and proactively take measures to build inclusive communities, to break down walls of segregation, and to really further kind of racial and social equity when we think about housing. So that's a new component. There's a lot of analysis and programs that go along with that, kind of woven throughout. Next slide, please. So the housing element, really, it's fairly kind of straightforward in terms of its structure. These are the major components. We look at our housing needs in Los Angeles. Where are the greatest needs? We look at what constraints and barriers we have and what opportunities exist and how we can meet those needs. And then we have to look at opportunities for conservation in housing construction and maintenance, as well as sustainability. And then we take all that and really come up with the core of the document, which is sort of these goals, objectives, policies, and programs. And the programs are really these action steps that the city plans to take over the next 8 years, all departments, all agencies, putting numbers down, putting metrics down. What are we going to do as a city as a whole to address housing issues in the next 8 years? Is this really interesting program? I encourage folks to focus on the programs. That's sort of the plan for the next 8 years. And then on top of that, again, is all the RENA process and the site selection. Yeah, go ahead, skip ahead. So just where we are in the process, we've been at this for about a year now. We started right before COVID. We had some in-person engagement, but have been doing a lot of in-line engagement. We have a task force of about 60 stakeholders, community members, housing advocates, experts that have been advising us along the way. We've been doing some webinars with our draft concepts, which is a term I'll talk about. This is sort of how we're organizing the update. And we're getting close to releasing our draft. We do not have a draft quite yet, but that is anticipated in June. And obviously, once we release that, we will be doing another rounds of updates and outreach to get input on that draft before the eventual adoption, which is required by October 1st of this year. Next slide, please. So just really quick, I might run through this, just housing needs. Obviously, I don't think it's a shock that we have some severe housing needs in this city. In fact, we are the most cost burdened city for renters of any major American city, with folks paying almost 50% of their income on average here in the city of Los Angeles. And that's when you compare rents to incomes, and it's a function of both, right? We have kind of very lower incomes compared to our high housing costs. Next slide. We are a city of renters, even though sometimes we look like a city of single family homes. We are actually second in the country in renter. A lot of those single family homes are renter occupied. And we're also have an aging housing stock. As you can see, we've sort of, most of our housing stock was built prior to the 50s and 60s, and we've been sort of declining every decade since then. Next slide, please. We are also the most overcrowded region and city in the country. And this has obviously manifested itself with the COVID and the health pandemic, with overcrowded communities really bearing the brunt of the epidemic. And so we're seeing how important these issues of housing, affordability, and overcrowding are. Next slide. And really, this is we just don't have enough homes. We really truly have a housing shortage in this city. We have the fewest number of homes per capita or per adult of any major region. If we had sort of just the national average of the amount of homes per adult, we would have an additional 130,000 homes here in the city of Los Angeles. Next slide. Population is certainly not going up right now. We're hearing from the demographers, but it has been actually. This decade grew faster than the prior decade, and we're expecting future growth as well. We're aging. Our senior population is really exploding, and that's a real focus of this housing element, the housing needs of seniors. And at the same time, we're actually losing children now for the second decade in a row, losing children in the city of Los Angeles. Next slide, please. And sort of, the impacts of this housing crisis are being felt most, dramatically by women and people of color, whether you're looking at rent burden and females at the top of that list, as well as homelessness, and with our Black and Hispanic populations suffering from the homelessness issue the most. So we're really elevating kind of disparate impacts of the housing crisis in this document. Next slide. In terms of our barriers, right, we don't have enough money to fund all of our affordable housing needs. Really, cuts in federal and state housing resources have hit us hard. And we're really trying to just claw for any dollars we can. We also don't have enough land where we can actually build affordable housing, right? As this map shows, only that kind of dark brown, 17% of our residential land can actually really build affordable housing. where it's the density is high enough for a nonprofit to come in and construct it. So we're looking at land as a barrier. Of course, a very cumbersome and costly process to develop supportive and homeless housing and affordable housing. And then we know we're losing the affordable housing we built decades ago as affordability covenants often expire and we lose affordable housing at the same time. So these are our barriers. Next slide, please. Okay, so to get into the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, sounds like you may know a little bit about this. This is this way that we make sure cities do their fair share, and it really starts from the state issuing the region a number, a housing target. This year it was 1.3 million housing units for the 6-county SCAG region, the Southern California region. Then SCAG, the regional government, took that number and divided it amongst 180 jurisdictions here in Southern California, according to a methodology that tried to look at, where's the best location for greenhouse gas and transit access, as well as social equity. And so that number came to us as, next slide. Yes, so the right-hand column is our new RHNA target, 455,000 housing units in the next 8 years, a truly staggering amount of housing compared to 82,000 the last 8-year cycle, so more than 5 times higher. And really this is a reflection again of changing state law that said cities, you need to plan not just for your projected needs, as has been in the past, like future births and deaths and migration, that's considered projected need. This year, we're asked to look at existing need, that deficit, that shortage of housing that's creating the cost burdens, the overcrowding. Those factors are actually part of the formula now. And Southern California and Los Angeles scored very poorly, and so got a really large existing need allocation added on this cycle, and that really explains the higher number for us. Next slide. Oh, sorry, I should mention that the bottom is the portion of that number for lower income affordable units below 80% AMI or area median income. This means that certain amounts of this number need to be able to be built by affordable housing. As I said, there's sort of a minimum density you need to build affordable housing, and so we need to show we have enough land to accommodate that affordable housing as well. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of visually representing how much we would need to increase to meet these new targets. So this is housing production from 1980s. You can see up and down, and we've been doing okay, building more housing lately, around 20,000 units a year, but we need to get to 57,000 units a year, almost 3 times more than we've been doing even in these high production years. So quite a big target we have in front of us. Next slide, please. And then on the affordability, obviously we're much further behind in terms of producing affordable low-income units. This is our affordable housing production in the city of Los Angeles in the last 10 years. You can see it's generally been increasing, and we had a really nice year in 2020. We almost doubled our affordable housing production last year. And then we broke this down into the top sort of teal color is the 100% affordable, typical subsidized affordable housing. And that was increased as a result of Measure HHH and some local and state dollars that came in this year, and we were permitting those units this year. But the bottom is units, the blue is really mixed income, and this has been growing the fastest. This is non-subsidized mixed income housing. You could think about a density bonus or TOC if you know those terms in land use circles. These are housing incentive programs the city has to try to get private developers to build affordable housing. And as you can see, we built almost 1,300 units last year for free, no subsidies, and doubling prior amounts there. And so this is a growing, and we need both. We need more funding. We also think we can create more affordable housing through the bottom, through private developers building more affordable housing as well. Next slide, please. Yep, and then so we'll talk about what we do with this RHNA number is we have to do a 2-step process. The first is the site selection. Next slide. So to show the state we have enough sites to meet our RENA, we have to identify sites that are suitable for housing, that have the capacity to build housing and affordable housing. And this has been strengthened considerably to make sure that the city is selecting realistic sites, not sites that really have no chance of turning into housing. Maybe it's some cities were saying the mall is going to redevelop, and malls often don't redevelop into, get torn down. Cemeteries, things like churches. No, we have to show land that has a realistic capability of turning into housing. So that's a process we're going through right now. They have to have a likelihood to develop. And actually that's brand new. We have to try to calculate what is the likelihood of every site turning into housing. And so we're doing a very complicated model looking at past production, what sites turned into housing to help us predict the future. And we're hoping that will satisfy these new requirements. And then we analyze where our sites are, and we have to make sure our sites advance our fair housing objectives. And if they do not, if, for example, we find that many of the sites for low-income housing are primarily in low-income or segregated communities, high-poverty communities, overly concentrated, then we have to come up with programs to address this. And this is something we're looking at very seriously, and really see this as an opportunity to really rectify some of the historical imbalances and injustices around our planning and zoning and housing policies, to make sure all communities in Los Angeles do their fair share. And so that is a major focus of this effort. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we select our sites and we see if we have enough. And if we don't, which I can tell you, it does not look like we have enough sites. It does look like we are going to be short. If there is a shortfall, we have to rezone areas of the city within 3 years to meet those numbers. And so we're fortunate we have a number of planning efforts already happening in the city. We call these community plan updates. You could see them in blue. These are areas where we are looking at changing zoning right now. And if those plans are completed within 3 years, we'll count those units, any upzones in those areas. But we may need additional rezoning programs as well. So we're looking at a variety of options in terms of other rezoning programs, citywide programs that again really focus on equity, anti-displacement, and sort of rectifying some of the land use decisions of the past. So the rezonings are going to help us further fair housing goals. Thank you. Yeah, next slide. So beyond that, I want to just talk more broadly about the vision and the concepts here. We really, tried to understand where we are and what are the priorities in Los Angeles. And this is what we heard from communities when we did our outreach. They want us to, do a better job of protecting renters and preventing displacement. And it's actually remarkable how little of that was in the current document, maybe reflecting a different time when foreclosures was the big issue 8 years ago, and focus on homeownership, and housing prices were kind of down. Very different world today, obviously, and so we want to make sure we really advance anti-displacement and housing stability in this document. We need to produce more housing, especially affordable housing. We need to plan and zone for more inclusive communities and prioritize the most vulnerable. Obviously, we need to do much more to prevent and address the homelessness crisis, as well as prevent more livable, healthy, resilient, sustainable neighborhoods. And more affordable ownership opportunities is also a big focus of this plan as well. Next slide, please. So we have this concept called concepts. It's how we presented to the public about what really do we want this housing element to do, and how can we sort of frame these issues into different categories. And so these concepts, we have 6 concepts. They were influenced by, obviously, policy direction and public input, as well as the housing element law. And then, a really thorough review of our existing policies, what's working, what's not, inform these concepts. Next slide, please. So this is, I'm not going to go through this. This is kind of, what we've done in the last 8 years in the city. And we've done a lot. It is actually remarkable. It doesn't seem like it on the ground sometimes, I know. But in terms of more resources for funding, we have a linkage fee now on all development. We have Measure H, HH, and H, and J in the county. We have, much more with our public land. We have, comprehensive homeless strategy, a number of production tools, preservation tools. We've increased our tenant protection. Still much more to go, but we wanted to acknowledge some work that has been done. Next slide, please. So this is another term we're using, just these overarching priorities for the plan and for the concepts. These are things we want all of the plan concepts and strategies to do. We need to address the housing shortage again, particularly for lower income. We need to advance racial equity and access to opportunities and make sure that that all neighborhoods are open and have access. We want to promote sustainability and resilience. These are kind of core themes, and we do that by balancing housing production, preservation, and protection of tenants and housing. So a balanced approach, hopefully. Next slide, please. So these are our 6 concepts. Just really, again, elevating housing stability and anti-displacement, both direct and indirect displacement, making sure particularly communities of color have the protections given the vulnerability. So that'll be an emphasis throughout, as I mentioned, as well as housing production, especially affordable. So a lot of strategies on where can we produce housing that leads to less displacement, that we're not building housing in the same neighborhoods where there's existing apartments. We need to look to areas for housing that do not involve demolition of existing apartments. And that links to this idea of access to opportunity, to make sure all areas of our city are open, that we're proactively trying to break down walls of segregation and build inclusion. And that may mean some bringing affordable housing opportunities to areas where they do not exist today. And then preventing and ending homelessness, obviously a huge topic where there's so much work going on. We could spend an hour talking about those efforts. Then the built environment, which includes the health aspects, the livability, the sustainability aspects. And then finally, meeting the unique needs of all Angelenos. This is really making sure we do not forget and actually prioritize those with special needs, including seniors, the disabled populations, as well as large families, folks who need unique accommodations in their housing and have particular needs. Make sure we're meeting that. So those are our 6 concepts. So there's you can go online, we'll share resources here. We have links on the slide where you can dig in and see some of the detailed strategies. Obviously, we don't have time to do all that today, but this is the broad overview of the main things we hope to accomplish with the housing element. Next slide, please. So we take those concepts and then we bring them and we turn that into the plan. We turn those into goals, objectives, policies, which informs our future policy work. Everything should be consistent. These policies are also used when we look at projects to make sure the projects are meeting our goals and objectives. And then I mentioned this other bucket of programs. These are our action steps. What are we going to do to meet our needs? And these concepts all are being looked at to make sure we're doing things. We're taking steps, meaningful steps that will advance all of those concepts in our programs for the next 8 years. Next slide. Okay, so next steps, we're wrapping up here. Sorry, this is a bit long. But we continue to gather feedback. We're developing the draft, essentially, these goals, policies, programs. We're still sort of, fine-tuning our site selection and the rezoning programs to meet the RENA. And again, plan to release the draft this spring, likely June. Next slide, please. So this is, these are all links that you guys can all click on. If you want to dig in deeper to the city, you can look at our task force meetings, the discussions, all our webinars, all the PowerPoints, these detailed concepts, the strategies, those are all there for your perusal at your own leisure. But we wanted to give you these quick links on this page. Next slide. Yeah, so please, we encourage you to get involved, come to our website, sign up for our email, attend our webinars, spread the word, and really look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you. Is that it? I think that's it.
Yeah, I believe that's probably the last slide.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much, Matt. Really appreciate what a thorough presentation. I know it's very thorough at a very high level because I know there's a lot of detail underneath it all. Pamela has many questions in the chat. Pamela, I wonder if you'd like to ask your questions in order of Matt, in the order you'd like.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Matt, for the presentation. I think my first question in a different order is, you mentioned that another way that the community could get more affordable housing is through their community plan updates. But I'm hearing from you that this housing element will be adopted much sooner than we expect the community plans to be adopted. So in what very specific ways could this process dictate the community plan process? You know, and so that's one question. Then you also mentioned that there's a new consideration for the housing element. So I wonder if you can talk a little more about what are the variables for likely to redevelop? Like what are the considerations for that category that the planning department is looking at?
Great, thank you. Great questions, Pamela. So yeah, our community plans is where we do usually dig into the local zoning and make those local changes. You know, it's often a very lengthy process. It's, you know, Hollywood has been doing their plan for 15 years, I think, at least. Many of these plans are taking 5 years. They're very exhaustive. They're very detailed. But that's really the best place we think to make changes to land use and zoning is through the community level, not at a citywide level. So that is true. That is where the majority of these policies around where can affordable housing go, how much affordable housing, how much housing in general is often through the plan updates. So you ask a good question. How can this citywide housing element process really influence where the action is? And maybe I'd say a couple of things. Number one, I think most importantly, this is kind of a big deal, maybe a little bit of an advance you guys are getting. It's not too public yet, but one of the draft ideas we have is to really completely restructure the way we do community plans and make sure that citywide goals such as equity, such as fair housing, such as sustainability are built in to the local process. So basically the idea is to look at housing needs at a citywide level, look at Arena, look at this 500,000 number, and say, how can we distribute that number in a way that is fair, that meets the citywide objectives, to ensure, again, that every community plan does their fair share. That actually is not the way it happens today. It's a little more based on, has a community been growing? And if so, they're expected to continue to grow. But if they've not been growing, they're often sort of not asked to do much around housing, to be honest. And so we want to think about a new process that would sort of say, based on our values, things like, it would be a formula is what we're thinking of, kind of a formula that looks at, again, high resource areas with great opportunities for good schools, jobs, transit, amenities, areas where you have a chance to succeed. Make sure there's housing going in those areas, as well as factors like environmental sensitive areas that are vulnerable for displacement. On the flip side, as de-emphasizing those areas. Again, access to transit and jobs, very important, but kind of building a formula that says, okay, based on this citywide formula that we all agree on, here's how we're going to allocate our housing numbers to the plan areas. And then the plan's job is to figure out how to accommodate and make local changes within their plan area. But they're sort of not, they're sort of going to have to meet a number, just like the city of Los Angeles has to meet a regional number. We're looking at a system that says the community plans would have to meet a number, and they would figure out with the community where the best place is for that housing to go and how much affordable housing, et cetera. But they sort of are assigned a number that we've all agreed on ahead of time based on these citywide priorities around equity and sustainability. So that's a big idea. I don't know, it's a little wonky, but that really is, I think, a fundamental change to ensure that these factors are incorporated in the community plans. I mentioned maybe, just like you mentioned, what immediately is going to happen immediately, because that is a little longer term. That's going to take some time to do that formula and figure that out. But more near term, as I mentioned, we are likely going to rezone, have to rezone to meet Arena. We're going to be short. And so that rezoning is a real opportunity, again, to look at a citywide ordinance that can take in those same factors I mentioned around equity and sustainability and make sure our rezoning is done in a way that is fair and equitable and reflects our values. And so that's something that is more near term, and that's something we're going to be getting more in detail with in some of our outreach in the future as we develop those ideas, see what the community likes, and that'll actually be in the near term. Because it is fair. A lot of this is policy document. It doesn't change things overnight, but that is one opportunity that changes things overnight. I might just mention one other little detail here that I think is exciting is that when you select a site, now that site actually gets protected with what we call housing replacement policies or tenant, I call them tenant protections. This is in state law that says when you select a site to meet your RHNA, any housing development project that comes on that site, in October, as soon as we adopt, would now have to do affordable housing replacement, make sure there's no net loss of affordable housing, there's a net gain, and that we're replacing any RSO, rent stabilized units with new rent stabilized, any low income with low income. And in fact, if we don't know the incomes, we assume it's low income. And so we're making sure that there's never a loss of affordable housing on any site overnight in October, as soon as we designate sites. And we're thinking we are gonna, this is your second part of your question, sorry, is how do we look at the likelihood to inform those sites? Because I mentioned to include a site, it has to have a likelihood of turning into housing. And you asked, how do we ensure it has a likelihood? And as I kind of touched on, we're using kind of a complicated econometric formula where we're getting with some academics to look at what sites have been turned into housing in the last 8 years, what types of sites, what zoning, what was there, what was the use, what was the density, what's the market area, all these factors to look at what sites turned over in the past. And that's going to help us predict the likelihood of sites turning over in the future. It's actually very scientific. Most cities don't do that. And so that is coming, it basically shows that most sites do not turn into housing, right? Most sites stay the same. Only about 1% of our sites turn into new housing every 8 years. And that gets, but some sites are more likely than others. And that's all built into this formula that we're actually sort of building into our model. So that's a little wonky as well. I hope that made sense. But great questions. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Did that answer? Do you have additional questions or follow-on questions, Pam?
No, I think he responded to the. Yeah, no. The other one, well, I guess it's quick, Matt. So you mentioned the covenants are expiring, and I've seen the county do really good work in their recent affordable housing preservation and inclusionary housing. The county extended for new development covenants from 55 years to life of the project. Would the city consider to do the same thing?
Thank you. We are looking at that. That permanent affordability or 99-year affordability. That is something that is one of our strategies we've already put out there that we want to see where we can do that. We actually just had an interesting call with folks that have been advising the county on their policy changes. And so yes, absolutely, that's something we're looking at. We want to make sure when we build affordable housing, it is as affordable as long as we can. There's some complications around tax credits and we don't want to hurt an affordable developer, but certainly for market rate projects, we think we could certainly go further than 55 years. There's some legal questions how we best do that, but we are committed to doing that and actually have an idea of implementing that in the next year or two through an update to our density bonus program, which is really all of our incentive programs combined. And for all of those programs, we really would like to put in a 99-year or permanent affordability. So we're always looking at what the county's doing and vice versa. Yeah, thank you.
Very nice, thank you. We have an additional couple questions from Vivian. I'm going to see if Vivian's microphone is working so she can ask them herself.
Can you hear me?
We can. There's a little bit of
thank
feedback,
you.
but we can hear you. Thank you, Vivian.
Yeah, I'm having some technical problems with my devices. And I have several of them, so this is the best I can do. I think that the issue of housing is, of course, very, very important for all of us. And I feel that families really should have an opportunity to be first-time home buyers. I also think that when you speak about not enough land, as I mentioned in my chat, that there's plenty of land between like San Diego and Las Vegas. The high-speed rail is coming in. I think it's really important for LA, the city of Los Angeles, to share the wealth and not create high density so much as helping to create communities outside of the city of Los Angeles so that we can build communities, such as communities that have already been built, including Los Angeles. Porter Ranch is a relatively new community. When you know look at the age of every other community, it is a little higher rent there, but we should be able to have, we do have the capacity to build out of the city of Los Angeles. And I think it's important to share the wealth so that we can create affordable homes, not apartments and high density, and create jobs in building these new communities. And I also feel that many of the high rises and market rate development that is currently going on are actually contributing to the homelessness, where the people without homes currently or soon to be out of homes will not be able to afford those market rate developments, and many of them are unoccupied. I know that there was a fee that they were talking about with regards to charging these unoccupied owners a fee, because we need that housing for homelessness currently right now, but it's not being addressed. So again, there's plenty of land, building our own communities, counties, cities.
Sorry,
It's important. Thank you.
Vivian, I'm so sorry we're losing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, there's again, my tablet is being a little awkward, but
A little wonky. Well, thank you so much. I think you've raised two very important points. So I think, Matt, to summarize from Vivian's written comments as well as spoken comments, there's that kind of sense of how does the regional approach work to ensure that, you know, LA County is a very richly resourced from a financial perspective, but how do we kind of spread the opportunity or the wealth or seize advantage of other sites and, you know, adjacent to LA City, adjacent to LA County? What is the regional approach in that regard?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll be honest with you. The city took a kind of a different position than that. Given when the distribution I mentioned happens by SCAG, the regional 6-county government took this regional 6-county number and decided where are we going to allocate the 1.3 million. SCAG for a long time has been distributing a lot of the numbers to the peripheral, to the suburbs, to the Inland Empire, to San Bernardino, Palmdale, Lancaster areas, because they've been growing the fastest. That actually was reversed in a pretty dramatic, interesting, at least for nerds like myself. It was kind of, and it was Mayor Garcetti sort of joined forces with some of those far out communities and said, this is actually suburban sprawl. This is bad for the environment. And we think that inland areas with jobs and transit that have been getting off the hook, frankly, I think from the mayor's perspective, places like Beverly Hills and, you know, South Pasadena here where I live, many communities have only had to do 3 units of housing, 4 units. Beverly Hills had 8 units of housing, whereas, you know, Inland Empire, Moreno Valley got, 10,000 units. And people were saying, is that fair? Does that further social justice? Does that further our sustainability and equity goals? And there was a very close vote, but in the end, they totally switched and went much more towards an infill, coastal allocation rather than inland. And so I appreciate your point of view. I think it is often more affordable out on the edges. But I think that's actually part of the problem that they're trying to solve. Is they're trying to say we need the inland areas that are closer to the jobs and the transit to be more affordable, and housing is part of that solution, more affordable housing. So I'm not hopefully giving my opinion, but I did want to let you know what the city's opinion on that was, because it sort of was very relevant. But agree, first-time home ownership. So we're looking, how can we create first-time home ownership, more affordable opportunities without necessarily high-rise or sprawls? I think there are many things we can do just in terms of smaller pieces of land and things like that to make affordable home ownership more likely. It is crazy out there, I'm sure, as everyone knows. It's very difficult for even moderate, good income people to find a home ownership and get in that rung of that ladder. We need to do more. And so we are thinking of many approaches on affordable home ownership that don't necessarily involve high rises and all that. But great, I appreciate those questions. Thank you.
And I think one final question was about anything related to occupancy or, you know, I think the Airbnb situation that we found ourselves in a few years ago where apartment buildings or condominiums were half empty because it was all Airbnb. Is there any kind of ongoing regulation or thought around ways that that might be addressed?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. Absolutely, that is all very important. We do not want apartments sitting vacant or for tourists where there should be in a hotel when we're in a housing crisis. So just on Airbnb, I think the city is you know, it's not perfect. It's a really challenging issue, but we did pass an ordinance, a home sharing ordinance that legalized sharing of your own home if you live there, but got really strict on enforcing vacant homes and homes left alone. And so the number of listings, for example, has gone down by 90% in Los Angeles. We've actually got a good agreement with Airbnb. I'll say that. I think it's a model where we tell them to take down illegal listings, and they do. Everybody has to have a registration number. They have to show they live there. And we have seen 90% reduction. And so we actually tracked this and saw vacancies, you know, people switching from short-term to long-term. We saw the biggest spike in, you know, sort of on Zillow and Craigslist of rental units. And that's when we saw prices start to moderate a little bit. So I'm not saying, you know, but just to agree with you that we need to get vacant units back, and it's very helpful. We need to produce and preserve. And the vacancy tax is a great idea. We're backing that in the plan. We do not want units sitting there speculating either. So certainly appreciate those comments. Thank you, Heather, for reminding me.
Thank you so much. Well, I think that is the major questions that we have raised for your presentation today. Thank you so much, Matt. Obviously, housing is always a topic of incredible interest, not just to the HICP table, but I think to every person who lives in Los Angeles, both because of the high rents and costs of housing that we all experience, plus the homelessness crisis that surrounds every one of us every day as we go about our daily lives. So we're so grateful to see so much movement, so much progress, and some really wonderful thinking around equity and how's this next plan going to really address an equitable distribution of the resource. So very exciting things to come. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you all.
All right. Well, I'm so excited to move on in our presentation. As said, Matt's presentation was shared out with everyone, and he's listed here his email address if you want to follow up with specific questions or comments with him directly. With that, I'm delighted to welcome Ms. Iris Rein to join us and share some fabulous photos of the artworks that are embracing our campus and bringing our campus to a colorful and artistic life. So Iris, welcome.
Hi, thanks everybody. So I'm going to talk about, I just in general, I wanted everybody to know that by the end of fall 2021, there are actually going to be 6 major new artworks on the campus. And when I counted them up yesterday, that is actually kind of remarkable. And we're really very honored to sort of contribute to the opening up and hopefully the healing that's going to happen in the next year. So I wanted to just start out with mentioning the LACUSC Child Care Center. If everyone recalls, on State Street here, there's going to be the new Child Care Center, which is on its way. And there's a wonderful area that Jorge Orozco in particular, I know was involved in the planning of sort of a little seating area, lunch area, meeting area right outside the enclosed areas of the campus. And there's going to be a new mosaic mural there. And I'm going to give you a little update on that. So the mural is by an artist named Andrew Hem. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, let's just stay on this. And some of the words that we gleaned together with the community, and these are actually going to be the words that we're using throughout. These are words that we're using throughout all the artworks: is welcoming, inclusive, reflective of the local community. Specifically for this artwork, because it is in a child care center, energetic, hopeful, playful, accessible to children. And this idea of inspiring trust, reassuring, healing, and sort of a feeling of warm colors. So these are the words that were generated in discussion with the HICP community, of course, but also with the parent community at the Child Care Center, and then with LACUSC staff. So these are our sort of guiding mottos. This just to, yeah, next slide, please. This is Andrew Hem's artwork, who is the selected artist for this artwork. Next slide. And this now is the final design for the artwork. The previous, the design that he was selected on involved an engagement with the staff and children at the Child Care Center, which he did in I think March. He went out there fully masked and photographed children at the Child Care Center in the garden, in the yard area. And he was able to incorporate, and somebody also from HICP, you know who you are, and he was able to incorporate characteristics of these children into the artwork. So it's not a one-on-one translation of these children, but you know, maybe the hair or maybe sort of a facial characteristic. And he also made the children sort of more universal in age. So, you know, there's some little ones there, like the girl in blue, and then some older ones. So they're all working together, tied together by this sort of red jump rope that is a symbol of trust and collaboration. And of course, in the background, he was working with sort of a fantastic image of architecture that is very specific to this community that I'm sure you all recognize and not recognize, right? So he made it sort of fantastical and imaginary. Next slide, please. I wanted to mention, and this is something from the input, I'm going to call out Ari, if you don't mind, that Ari advised us in the last time we talked about this artwork, and that is sort of corresponds to what Matt just talked about, the meeting the needs of all Angelenos. This in particular is one of the children that is depicted in the artwork who is differently abled. And can you go back to the previous slide? So the artist wanted to show all different kinds of children from all different backgrounds. And so that included many different facets of people's life. I also wanted to mention that in his developing the artwork, there was a lot of discussion about masking and not masking. And he had included one child initially that was masked, and the conversation was very split as to whether that would be a wonderful thing to normalize mask wearing or whether that would be triggering. And then and we talked about it with the parent committee, that there was sort of a split thoughts about that. And then Jorge in the end said, Jorge Orozco said, the artist should decide. And the artist was thinking about it and finally decided in favor of revealing the faces and the facial characteristics and not you know, and eliminating any discussion about the masks being triggering. So he didn't include the masks. And another thing that I also wanted to mention is during this entire process, actually, the artist's wife has been pregnant, which is something I just found out about a month ago, and is actually giving birth pretty much at the same time, just a couple of weeks before the mural is going to be installed. So we didn't realize how close to his heart this mural actually was. And I wanted to share that with you because it's not something that he talked about publicly, but he's okay to release it now. Okay, next couple, maybe 2 slides down, next one. So just to talk about sort of the process of how the mural gets developed. There are different mosaic colors that are assigned to different parts of the mural. Next slide. And here you can see one of the figures, the boy on the right, and how this is sort of coming together in mosaic. And this act of translating the mural into mosaic, or translating the design into mosaic, it's a very laborious process. And you can see how custom the individual mural pieces are. And this is actually part of what Andrew Hem really wanted, is because the mural is going to be at the height where children can actually touch, at least the bottom of it. And the idea that there would be these different shapes and different sizes of the stone that they could run their fingers against was really important to him. So next slide, please. So you can see the figure is, this is the first figure that's being developed, and you can see the second figure on the right, and how they're working out sort of the different skin tones and figuring all of that out. Next slide, please. So just to look a little bit at the installation schedule here. So right now it's slated for September, and the artist is in fabrication. Okay, next slide. So I also wanted to just give a quick update on the LACUSC murals, the Restorative Care Village murals, and also on the coerced sterilization artwork. Coerced sterilization, I don't have any photos of it, but that also is going to be in installation in the summer. And I think that's been talked about in different meetings. But just a little refresher for the restorative care villages, because they're now, anyone who drives by can see how advanced the buildings are at this point. Oh, can you go back a little bit? So just a reminder, on Zonal Avenue, this will be the first mural by Lorenzo Hurtado Segovia, and I'm actually supposed to go see it today. The artists, because of social distancing, they are hiring people to basically put up the entire mural in open spaces. And then I'm going and inspecting to make sure that the tiles are okay and that nothing's flipped and that everything's safe. And then they're repackaging everything and holding on to the murals in their studios until time for installation. Next mural, next slide, please. So just a refresher, this is the final, the first mural there, and it's on restorative, the treatment program, I think A. All right, next slide. So this is the mural that is in between, so the middle mural on Zonal Avenue. Next slide, please. And I wanted to show, in case people weren't aware of quite the scale of these murals. So this is Jamie Skolnick on the right, and the Director of Civic Arts, Grace Ramirez-Gaston, on the left. And this is during the inspection of Jamie's mural. And you can see on the photo on the right, you can see the scale of a person in relation to the murals. And how, and all the little white labels, this is all the, all the instructions for the layout that the tile layers or the tile installers will use. But so this is kind of what an inspection check looks like. So it's pretty exciting because this is the first time we get to see the entire mural. Next slide. I wanted to show this also. This is the mural, the furthest mural. So this is on the restorative recuperative treatment program C building on Zonal Avenue. This is Patrick Martinez's mural, and I'm also going to see that today. But the reason I included this slide and sort of the architectural drawing is if you look on the left where it says 13 feet 6, that's how far the murals are going to be off the ground. So I just wanted to mention that because they're going to be up and very safe, and not touchable, and also visible from afar. And I also wanted you to see, because the two buildings on zonal that are behind Lorenzo Hurtado's mural are somewhat staggered. And so you'll see from the street, you'll sort of see a little oblique view of these murals, and then you'll see sort of another view from inside the campus. And okay, next slide, please. So this is the mural across from the Recuperative Care Center, and you can see this is Star Montana's mural, and you can see how gentle it is, and sort of warm feeling and very calming. I included this slide also just so that there's an awareness of how the images are then translated into tile, and you can see all the little tile lines. So this is the actual layout from the fabricator communicating with the artist. And just so that there's an awareness, there will be tiny little grout lines, and we just narrow down the color. They're going to be dove gray. And so this is part of the process. And this is part of what you'll see when you see these murals. Next slide, please. This here, I included this. This is a floor plan, a site plan of the buildings. And you can see on Zonal Avenue, so there are these Patrick Martinez, these initials, which artists are in what buildings. Where the red arrows are where the civic art plaques are going to be. The plaques in this case are going to be translated by our own Elisa Chavez Fraga into Spanish. So each artist has, these are kind of special plaques. They're not just writing the name of their artwork, they're also writing sort of a little paragraph, like what it means or some information. And we're having that translated into Spanish so that anyone could read a little bit about the artwork. Another thing that we're doing, and this, I couldn't figure out how to get it read this morning, but so you see on Zonal Avenue, there's sort of a donut shape in sort of an ochre color. That is actually going to be the site for another plaque, a larger plaque that will be mounted into one of the planters and will be specifically addressed to the community outside the site. So, and that will have like a little map, you know, pointing out the different, probably with a site plan sort of like this, and then we'll also have that information so that if you're inside the site, you can read all about the murals from the inside. But if you're outside walking by and you see, you know, you see these colorful murals, then you can also read about the murals without having to go inside, because I know we're trying to keep the community sort of connected, but also keep a little bit of privacy on inside of the site. So that's sort of an unusual thing that we're doing that I wanted to mention. Next slide. I wanted to show this. This was last week. We approved Star Montana's mural in the layout. And first of all, this is how many artists it took to lay out this mural. And I don't know if you can see, but I was telling Heather this morning, the pride that and sort of joy that the artists have just in having their work realized for this community and at this scale is just remarkable. And also the kind of collaborations that are starting to happen. So I wanted to share that with you. I think that's it. And so please, if anybody has questions or comments, definitely feel free to reach out here or email me.
Well, I think there's a lot of really appreciative comments about the beauty of the individual pieces of art, as well as just, I think, the opportunity to bring such colorful artworks to our campus. I personally feel like LA is a little deprived in public art space, so it's so exciting to see so much happening and coming to our beautiful campus to celebrate the work we do here, the people who work here and who will be living here at the Restorative Care Village. What a wonderful thing. We did have one question from Priscilla. She mentions that she was under the impression about the opportunity to have a child in a wheelchair as part of the mural at the Child Care Center. How did that discussion go?
So what we heard was a disabled child. And so the artist thought about it with the setup of, with this conceit of the jumping ropes, sort of symbolizing this working together in sort of this joyous way. The artist thought about it, and the interpretation was then to include a child with Down syndrome. And so that's how Andrew responded to this, the issue of a disabled child.
Thank you, Iris. We are at the end of our meeting time together. So just any final, any questions for Iris? Like I say, Iris, the comments are all just overwhelmingly grateful and appreciative. All right, with that, I believe we have come to the end of our time together today. If there's any kind of very quick partner announcements, I see we have 1 minute left on the clock. All right. Well, with that, I thank you one and all for joining us for yet another really interesting and important set of updates from our many partner organizations at the HICP table. We're very appreciative to all of our speakers today, who I think shared wonderful information. We will receive that missing slide from Esther about Measure J. We'll update our PowerPoint deck and we will send that back out to everyone. And then of course, it's always available on our HICP website. There'll be a meeting poll announced in just a minute where you can tell us any feedback or thoughts on how today's meeting went. And you're of course always welcome to leave ideas and suggestions for future meetings in our chat. We love to hear from you and make sure that we're meeting your needs and making sure that this space is as inclusive and representative of the interests of HICP members as is possible. And with that, we'll say thank you very much and have a wonderful Mother's Day weekend, and we'll see you in June.